Good morning from the U.S. Embassy here in Kingston, Jamaica, and welcome to a very special edition of Consular Conversations. My name is Camila, and I'm your host today. So we're going to be running things a little differently. While we here at Consular Conversations are always ready to assist you with consular-related questions, we also want our audience to get to know about other sections within the embassy that work alongside the consular section. So today, we have a special guest joining us. I'm joined by my colleague, Dominick, who hails from the United States Postal Inspection Service. Good morning, Dom.
Good morning, Camila.
So Dom, I'm guessing most of our audience today are not even aware that we have a United States Postal Inspector. So would you be able to talk a little bit more about what it is that USPIS does?
Sure. So here in Jamaica, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, we're focused on lottery scamming. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service, we're the law enforcement arm of the U.S. Postal Service. We enforce over 200 statutes, from anything from robbery to murder to rape to child pornography to mail fraud to mail theft. The Postal Inspection Service has been around since August 7th, 1775, so we actually predate the United States.
That's great information to have, and I also think it's a great overview of what it is that USPIS does throughout the world. So I know that March is National Fraud Prevention Month. Is there any type of scam that you guys would like to highlight during this time?
Absolutely. We are really focused on lottery scamming and money mules, so that's what I'd like to focus on today.
Okay, perfect. So can you talk a little bit more about how some people, especially older adults, tend to be targeted for these scams?
Yes. So a lot of the times the scammers will call the elderly persons in the States and try to scam them out of money. So they'll tell them that they won a lottery, $4.5 million in a Mercedes or some other luxury vehicle. They will try to get them to collect money from other persons to send down to Jamaica. There are a lot of different things that they try to do to try to get them to get money. So they'll actually have them to try to send phones or gift cards or value-added cards, and that's something that we can't have.
Okay, thank you. And when you talk about money mules, what is it exactly that means?
Sure. So a money mule will be someone who is collecting money from persons that they don't know to send to a scammer that's down in Jamaica, and that would be a money mule.
Okay, great. And so what would you say are some of the best practices that people can use to avoid being scammed?
Yes, I would say that some of the better practices for avoiding being scammed would be to not engage in any type of illegal activity that deals with a lottery that they know they've not been entered into. I would say that you want to hang up the phone if someone is talking to you and you don't know them, or don't answer the phone if you don't know the number. There are a number of things that you can do.
Okay, great. And what should people be looking out for that might alert them to a possible scam?
High pressure sales, someone telling you that they won something and they have to pay a fee, or they have to send cards or phones or any type of merchandise down to Jamaica. You want to look out for any type of thing that would be considered to be illegal.
Okay. Thank you so much. And if our audience knows someone who is possibly being the victim of a scam, what would you advise for them to do?
So the best thing to do is to talk to your loved one and advise them that they are in a possible scam, and talk to other people who may be more knowledgeable about that scam. They can also contact the Postal Inspection Service.
Great. And I'm sure people are wondering how it is that USPIS works alongside the consular section. So would you like to highlight some of our joint efforts?
Absolutely. So with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service and the consular section, we work to stop people who are using the visa system in a nefarious way. So the majority of Jamaicans who are going to the U.S., they're either doing it in a legitimate way. They're going for tourist reasons, or to shop, or maybe to go to school or to work, maybe even to migrate. But there are some who are going in to scam people, or to actually be a money mule, to collect money from people that they don't know, to bring back down to Jamaica for the scammers.
Yes, and Dom, to be clear, the people who create these scams and participate in them, they can be charged, correct?
Absolutely. So those persons who are engaged in these illegal activities, they can be charged both here in Jamaica and in the U.S. And our primary goal here at the U.S. Embassy is to extradite persons back to the United States. But we do work with the Jamaican law enforcement, the FID, MOCA, and the JCF to charge persons under POCA, which is the Proceeds of Crime Act. We also can charge them in the U.S. under 18 U.S.C. 1341 and 18 U.S.C. 1343, which are mail fraud and wire fraud, respectively. Both of those charges have 20-year sentences, and they can, that time is day for day in the federal system in the U.S. So if you get charged and you're found guilty of that crime, you can serve up to 20 years, and it would be at least 85% of that time.
Okay. Don, thank you so much for being here and talking both about fraud and scams, but also how you work alongside the consular section. I also want to thank you and always enjoy working alongside of you. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. We hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about fraud and scams and how to prevent them. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
And welcome to the live segment of our show this morning. I hope you were all able to tune in and enjoy that video with our colleague Dominick from the United States Postal Inspection Service in honor of National Fraud Prevention Month. Please let us know what you think about our cross-collaboration between departments here at the Embassy, and if you'd like us to continue bringing in special guests to highlight these efforts. So while our video covered the topics of scams and fraud, and that is still our main topic today, please feel free to ask any consular-related questions at this time. And to answer those, I'm joined by our Visa Chief, Stephen. Good morning, Stephen.
Yes, good morning, Camila, and good morning to all those listeners out there.
I think for those who are not able to tune in during the video portion, what would you say is the overall takeaway of our efforts with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service?
Well, I wanted to give my thanks to Dominick for providing some insights into how the U.S. Postal Inspection Service works and what its key focuses are. And I think one of the important things to take away from that video, which was very informative, was that if you are engaged in a scam of any kind in the United States, utilizing the Postal Service, you are potentially subject to prosecution, criminal prosecution in the United States, and you also run the very real risk of having your visa canceled. The other important takeaway is the fact for victims, if you do believe that you've been taken advantage of due to some type of scam, there are resources available to you, and the quickest and easiest way to access those resources is via the U.S. Postal Service's website, which is USPIS.gov.
Yes, so make sure that you check out those resources. Since we are on the topic of fraud, what would you say is the type of fraud found predominantly in Jamaica within our consular section?
Well, that's a very good question, Camila. Essentially, the big concern that we see, particularly with H2 visas as well as tourist visas, is a tendency for people to attempt to engage in what is referred to as unauthorized work. If you are in the United States on an H2 visa, that visa authorizes you to do specific work for a specific employer. If you engage in any type of work outside of what is specified on that visa, it constitutes unauthorized work. And you run the risk of having that visa revoked because you've misused it. And it's the same case with tourist visas. Tourist visas do not permit their holders to engage in any type of employment in the United States. When you're admitted into the United States on a tourist visa, it is for a specific tourist purpose or business-related purposes such as attending meetings, training, etc., but not paid employment. So if you do engage in employment on a tourist visa, it is unauthorized and you run the risk of visa revocation.
Yes, thank you very much for explaining those common types of fraud we encounter in the consular section. I think it's very important to highlight those and let our audience know some of the pitfalls that they can encounter, right? So before we get to our questions, we do want to go over the current operating status of the consular section. Could you enlighten us a little bit on that?
Well, I'm not so sure your listeners are going to be happy about this, but it's simply a continuation of the status quo, which, as you know, due to the pandemic, we are extremely limited in terms of the types and quantities of visa services that we can offer to the public. And we hope that that situation is rectified in the near future, but clearly there is no time frame for that. In terms of what that translates into on the non-immigrant visa side of the house, as your public probably knows, we are not processing any regular visa appointments. And I think of particular interest to the public would be the tourist visas, because they account for most of the non-immigrant visa processing that we do. I'm sorry to say that we cannot at this time process any regular tourist visa appointments. That said, in the case of emergencies, emergencies that correspond to very specific criteria that we are able to expedite visa appointments for people that need to travel to the United States for emergency purposes. And as you know, there is a specific process by which people can request an expedited appointment, and a consular manager will review that request and make a determination as to whether it meets our criteria. With respect to the immigrant visa side of the house, we are processing an extremely small number of appointments each day. And when I say extremely small, it's in the single digits. And the truth of the matter is, right now, because our operation has been dramatically impacted by the pandemic over a year-long period of time, we have a huge backlog of immigrant visa cases. That backlog is measured in the thousands. And right now, because of social distancing requirements, because of the pandemic, we're only able to get to a very, very small percentage of those cases. So to all those people out there that are waiting for an appointment, again, we apologize for the delay. Clearly, it's beyond our control, and we simply request your patience. We are committed to working ourselves through this backlog as the local conditions permit us to do so.
Yes, and as Stephen said, thank you very much for your patience. We understand the frustration that many people are going through, but unfortunately, that just is how we have to operate at this time. As a reminder, please make sure to share the stream with your followers on Facebook so that they are also aware that Consular Conversations is going on, and they can also send in their questions. So speaking of questions and speaking of fraud, we actually have a very relevant NIV question. Rose is asking, she's lost her expired passport with her visa in it. So she reported it to the police, and she got a letter to give to the embassy consular section. What are the next steps that she has to do?
Well, that's a very good question, because it's very commonplace for people to lose their passports containing their visas. So Rose, in your case, we're sorry to hear that you lost your passport. You have taken the first step of reporting it to the police. And now with that police report, you need to reach out to the non-immigrant visa unit at Kingston NIV at state.gov and send us that copy of the police report. Right? We will then, with that copy of the police report, we can then make a notation in our consular database that your passport containing that visa has been lost. And what that means is, from the time that we receive that notification and make the entry into the consular database, that passport is now registered as lost. And if it is used by somebody, the assumption is it was not used by its rightful holder. The one other thing that I would say to you, Rose, is if by any chance you happen to stumble across that passport, you actually find it, please do not attempt to use that visa, because it has been flagged in our systems as having been lost and has been canceled, which means it can no longer be used. You will need to apply for another visa, and incidentally, you will need to pay another visa fee.
Thank you very much for explaining how to report those lost and stolen passports. Another NIV question. So Norda and Keisha are both asking if an individual can apply for a non-immigrant visa while there's an application for filing being processed for them.
Filing
for an immigrant visa.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is another good question. It is possible to hold a non-immigrant tourist visa while an immigrant visa application is being processed. So yes, the person can indeed apply for a non-immigrant visa. However, and this is an important caveat, when the person comes in for their interview, they still have to demonstrate that they do not have intending immigrant they're not an intending immigrant. And in a situation like that, what it really translates into is they do not intend to misuse that tourist visa, i.e. to live in the United States. As long as they're using that visa for standard tourist travel or any of the other types of tourist-related reasons for travel, they are fine and they can qualify for a tourist visa, right? But it is important to understand that they have to demonstrate to an officer that they're not going to misuse that non-immigrant visa, i.e. they're not going to use that visa to go to the United States to wait indefinitely for the processing of an immigrant visa, because as we know, immigrant visa processing at this point is dramatically slowed down.
I was going to say, so speaking of immigrant visas, Petrona does have a question. She says, my husband's waiting on the embassy to give NVC the okay for a date for interview. I got the okay that all the documents and fees are intact, and they're waiting for that interview. Could you tell me when an interview will be ready for him?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot give you a particularly optimistic time frame for when an appointment will be available. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking at a backlog of cases for immigrant visas that has built up over a period of 12 months. I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but Jamaica is one of the top 10 immigrant visa processing posts in the world. In other words, we process a huge number of immigrant visas here in Jamaica. It's an extremely popular visa option. So as you can imagine, if we've not been able to schedule appointments for approximately a year, you're looking at a buildup of cases in the thousands. So anybody that is just starting with the immigrant visa process has to understand that their appointment will eventually be scheduled, but it will be after we accommodate all of these thousands of cases that have built up in a backlog. So the reality of it all is I can't tell you that you're going to be receiving an appointment anytime in the near future. I would say you'll be looking at a wait time of a number of months, anywhere from 6 to 12 months, if not longer, to actually receive an appointment.
Yes. And I know we're receiving a lot of questions on scheduling. Stephen, there's also questions asking about processing expedites versus regular scheduling.
Yes.
So I think we should talk a little bit about the fact that it's not just those expedited cases that are being interviewed. There are also, regular scheduled cases that are being interviewed at this time, correct?
Well, I would say yes and no. As I mentioned before, we're not scheduling or regularly scheduling tourist visa appointments. However, on the non-immigrant visa side of the house, there are various visa categories, and some of those visa categories are indeed prioritized by the department. Frankly, for most of those visa classes, we receive a relatively small number of visa appointment requests anyway. And in those cases where we're talking about prioritized visa classes, yes, we are able to schedule some limited regular visa appointments. So that is possible. But with respect to tourist visas, as I noted earlier, it is possible if people have emergency situations for them to request an expedited appointment. And if the emergency meets our criteria, we will indeed schedule an appointment.
Yes. So I guess the best way to clarify for everyone is for the non-immigrant side of the house, we are currently doing those emergency expedites only. But then for the immigrant visa side of the house, we are processing both expedites and some of those regular scheduling, because we're also rescheduling a lot of those appointments that were canceled due to PP 10014, correct?
Right, that's correct. And that's a good question. On the immigrant visa side of the house, again, expedites are always in play, provided they meet the necessary criteria. Again, given the limited number of immigrant visa appointments that we are scheduling now, while we are doing some regular appointments, it's a very small number. And as you note, we have any number of backlogs. There are a number of cases that were scheduled for appointments that we had to cancel a year ago when the presidential proclamation went into effect. And so we have to, or what we're looking to do is to prioritize those cases now to the degree that we can schedule them. So that's a small backlog that we have to get through, numbering in the hundreds of cases. And we have other backlogs that we're working through. So in terms of regular appointments, the answer is yes, we are doing some, but it's a tiny number.
And speaking of processing times, especially on the immigrant visa side, Natalie's asking, how long does it take to process and approve immigrant visas after additional information was requested?
Well, that varies on a case-by-case basis. It depends on what information, what additional information was requested, and whether the information that the applicant submits meets the requirements. That is to say, whether it answers the questions that we had that motivated us to ask for additional information. So it's all a question of whether that information complies with the documentary requirements that would then permit us to issue a visa. So that time frame is going to vary from case to case. And if you have a specific question about your particular case, I would invite you to submit an email to kingstoniv@state.gov, and they can give you details with respect to your particular case.
Definitely. So we're also receiving a lot of questions on those J1 visas. So Dahlia specifically is asking, what is the current status for J1 visas?
Well, I think that question would perhaps best be posed tomorrow because the proclamation that impacted J1 summer work travel visas runs through today. The one thing I will say is I'd like to caution people who are looking to apply for summer work travel programs. I'd like to caution them with respect to having high hopes about having their visas processed this year. And that is, again, because we are extremely limited in the number of regular visa cases that we can process, right? Both due to social distancing and other concerns, we are simply extremely limited in what we can do. We will be coming out with additional guidance with respect to how we can specifically address J1 summer work travel and what we plan to do in the very near future. So please stay tuned. But for the time being, we don't want to give people the impression that we will be processing J1 summer work travel visas as usual, because that will not be the case.
So going back a little bit to our topic, Novelan has a question regarding H-2B work visas that were revoked. So she's asking, for H-2B work visas whose work visa was revoked, will they get an appointment to come in and redo or come in to interview, I should say? So maybe I guess the best thing to talk about are visa revocations, especially within a fraud context, and some of the visa misuse that we see.
Right. Well, here again, this is a specific question because it's not clear to us, based on that particular question, what the basis was for the revocation of the visa. And to a certain degree, that would shape our response. The one thing I can say is that when visas are revoked, if people are interested in trying to obtain another visa of that same visa class, they need to basically go through the whole application process again, which means they have to complete a new application, submit that application, pay the requisite fees, and schedule a visa appointment. And at that point, when they come in for an interview, and they will be required to come in, a consular officer will review the case, review the basis for the visa revocation, determine whether the person qualifies for a visa at this time, and then render an appropriate decision.
So we have time for one more question, and I think we should address an ACS question since we don't get those a lot. So Trevor Lee was asking, how do I get the application notarized for my daughter's passport? So I think we can talk a little bit about how that, two-parent consent is required for passport applications.
Yes, that is correct. In the case of minors, i.e. individuals under the age of 14, they do require passport applications for minors do indeed require the consent, the signed written consent of both parents in order for us to process the passport application. And there is a specific form that both parents can fill out, or should fill out, and submit. For details, further details on that process, I would invite you to write to kingstonACS@state.gov.
Yes, and if you are looking to come do a notary appointment, please check our website. The schedule is available there if any notary appointments are available, and you can register for that. So Stephen, thank you very much for coming in today. And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope it was very informative, both the fraud and scam portion of our live, as well as this interaction with Stephen. Our next Consular Conversations will be on April 14th, so please stay tuned to that. Stephen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And we will see you all next time.